water that remembers. Start with a low, ambient sound of gentle river lapping, mixed with distant night insects. This fades out over the first 20 seconds. Most nights the river sang a lullaby. The Stung Tom, a tired old tributary of the great Mekong, would whisper against the wooden stilts of our home. It was a sound I had learned to sleep to again, a gentle rocking that seeped into your dreams. The air, thick and sweet with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and damp earth, would be alive with the frantic, electric hum of a million cicadas. It was the sound of life, the sound of Cambodia after the sun had surrendered to the moon. But not this night. This night, the Mekong's tributary no longer flowed with the rich, life-giving silt I knew. It was a sickly, rust-colored hue that refused to reflect the moon's silver light. The water looked dead, heavy like old blood. And the silence, oh, the silence was the worst part. The incessant chirp of cicadas, a sound so constant I usually didn't even notice it, was gone. Its absence was a physical pressure, an unnerving void that pushed in on all sides. The only sound left was the slow, wet slap of the diseased water against our house's stilts. It wasn't a lullaby anymore. It sounded like a hungry mouth, chewing on something soft. I stood on the veranda, the rough wooden planks cool beneath my bare feet, and stared out into the oppressive darkness. A single, empty sampan drifted in the sluggish current. Its bamboo fishing net, usually coiled with neat precision, was trailing in the water like a ghostly, skeletal limb. It belonged to Ta Chan, the old fisherman from 3 houses down. He was a man who knew the river better than he knew his own wife's face. He would never be so careless. Then I felt it. It wasn't a sound, not at first. It was a vibration, a low, guttural pulse that started in the soles of my feet and worked its way up my spine, settling deep in my chest. It thrummed through the foundations of the house, a monstrous, submerged heartbeat. It was a feeling more ancient than the stones of Angkor, a vibration felt more in the bones than heard with the ears. I looked at the water, and in my mind I heard my grandmother's voice, her words from that very afternoon, thin and reedy like dry grass. She had called it the sound of an ancient hunger, awakened by a forgotten promise, now patiently waiting for the tide to claim another offering. At the time, I had dismissed it as the ramblings of old age. Now, watching that empty boat drift into the darkness, I felt a cold dread begin to coil in my stomach. The river was waiting, and tonight it was hungry. I had only come back to the village 6 months ago. After a decade of breathing the exhaust fumes of Phnom Penh, of chasing deadlines and the hollow promise of a modern life, I returned to care for my Yi, my grandmother. She was the last root my family had in this small fishing community nestled along the Stung Tom. My city friends thought I was crazy, trading the pulsing neon for the quiet dark, the air conditioning for the oppressive humidity. But there was a peace here I had forgotten, a rhythm tied to the sun and the water. Or there had been. The next morning, the village was a hive of hushed whispers. Ta Chan had not returned. His wife wailed on the riverbank, her cries a thin, sharp sound against the unnatural quiet of the water. The river was still that disturbing, opaque red. Some of the younger men, brave and foolish, wanted to form a search party. The elders, however, shook their heads, their faces grim masks of fear. They stared at the water not with concern, but with a kind of terrified reverence. My uncle Bong Sathya, a practical man with hands as tough as dried leather, spat a stream of red beetle nut juice onto the dirt path. "It's the chemicals," he grumbled, though his eyes kept darting nervously towards the river. "From that new factory upriver, poisoning the water, killing the fish." But I knew it wasn't chemicals. Chemicals didn't stop the cicadas from singing. Chemicals didn't create a pulse you could feel in your teeth. That evening, I sat with my Yi as she meticulously sorted herbs on a woven mat. The air in our small stilt house was thick with the smell of lemongrass and incense from the small spirit house on the veranda. Her hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, moved with a deliberate slowness. "The water is angry, Rithi," she said, not looking at me. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Yi, Bong Sathya says it's just a factory." I tried, my voice sounding weak even to myself. She finally looked up. Her eyes, usually cloudy with cataracts, were sharp and clear. "Your uncle is a good man, but he sees only what is in front of his face. He does not feel the memory of the land. He does not hear the whispers in the water." She paused, her gaze drifting towards the window, towards the silent Red River. "Long ago, when this village was just a handful of huts, the river was wild. It flooded, it starved the people, it took children who wandered too close. It had a spirit, a powerful and hungry Neek that demanded respect. I had heard these stories as a child, tales of Naga and river spirits, but they were just that, stories. Fantasies to scare children away from the water's edge. The elders of that time," she continued, "were wise. They made a promise, a pact. They carved an offering not of flesh or gold, but of spirit. They gave the river a heart, a piece of the village's own soul bound in sacred stone. In return, the Neek would be calm. It would provide fish, it would keep the banks from crumbling, it would guard the village. For generations, the promise was kept." "What happened?" I asked, a knot tightening in my gut. Her face darkened. "Men forget, greed grows like a weed. An ancestor many lifetimes ago thought the stone was a treasure. He saw its dark, polished beauty and thought of the money it could bring in the city. He took it. He broke the promise." She took a rattling breath. "The river was quiet for a long time. Perhaps it slept, or perhaps it waited. But now it has woken up. It remembers the debt. It is demanding what it was owed." Her words hung in the humid air between us. The house was silent except for the creak of the bamboo floor and that awful wet slapping from below. The low, guttural thrumming started again, a slow, steady rhythm that felt like it was coming from directly beneath our home. I felt my skin crawl. This was no longer just about a missing fisherman. This was about a debt, generations old, that was finally coming due, and the creditor was right outside our door. The days that followed were a slow descent into a waking nightmare. No one went near the river. The fishing boats, the village's lifeblood, were pulled far up the muddy banks, looking like beached skeletons. The air of communal life evaporated, replaced by a suffocating fear. Doors were bolted at sunset. Families spoke in hushed tones, and the children, who usually filled the village with their laughter, were kept indoors, their eyes wide with a fear they couldn't understand but felt all the same. The rust color of the river deepened, turning into a thick, syrupy crimson. At night, a faint, foul odor would drift up from the water, a coppery, metallic smell like a slaughterhouse. And the pulse grew stronger. Some nights it was so intense that the ceramic pots in our kitchen would vibrate, their soft rattling a maddening counterpoint to the profound silence outside. I started to feel like a prisoner. My modern, rational mind, the one I had cultivated in Phnom Penh, was at war with the primal fear seeping into my bones. I tried to find explanations. An unusual algae bloom, a subterranean geological event, but my logic felt like a flimsy shield against an ancient, rising tide. I began my own quiet investigation. I found Ta Chan's abandoned sampan, which had snagged on some mangrove roots downstream. Inside, everything was as it should be, except for one thing. Etched crudely into the wooden seat, as if scratched with a fingernail in a last, desperate moment, was a symbol. It was a winding, serpentine shape, coiled in on itself. A naga. It made the hairs on my arms stand on end. It was one thing to hear my grandmother's stories, another to see this crude, terrified testament. My uncle Sathya was growing restless. He was a man of action, and this forced inactivity was wearing on him. "We are fishermen, Rithi," he exclaimed one afternoon, his voice raw with frustration. "We cannot starve because of old wives' tales. My family needs to eat. Ta Chan was old. He could have had a heart attack, fallen in. It is a tragedy, but it is not a curse." I tried to reason with him, to tell him what Yi had said about the symbol in the boat. He just waved a dismissive hand. "Your grandmother fills your head with stories. We live in a world of gasoline engines and mobile phones, not river dragons." But that night something happened that shook even him. We were eating our simple dinner of rice and salted fish when a loud crack echoed from under the house. We froze, spoons halfway to our mouths. Then another. It was the sound of wood splintering under immense, slow pressure. Bong Sathya grabbed a lantern and cautiously descended the stairs. I followed, my heart pounding against my ribs. One of the main stilts that supported our home, a log as thick as my body, had a deep, fresh crack running down its length. And wrapped around its base, just above the surface of the dark red water, was a thick, muddy vine that hadn't been there that morning. But it didn't look like a normal vine. It was slick and dark and seemed to tighten even as we watched. The house groaned above us. The guttural pulse was deafening down here, vibrating through the very mud beneath our feet. Bong Sathya stared, his face pale in the lantern light. He reached out a hesitant hand, then snatched it back. "What is that?" he whispered, his pragmatism finally shattered. "It's a warning," I said, my voice shaking. "It knows we're here. It's testing the foundations." We retreated back into the house, the silence between us heavy with a new shared terror. The city boy and the village fisherman, both humbled by a power that defied all explanation. My grandmother was chanting softly in her room, the scent of her incense suddenly feeling like the only protection we had. The river was no longer just waiting. It was actively reaching for us. It knew the debt was connected to our family line, and its patience, it seemed, was beginning to run out. The next 2 days, the pressure on the stilt continued. More of those strange, sinewy vines, dark and pulsing with a faint, internal light, wrapped around the foundations of our home. They looked less like plants and more like veins. The house groaned and settled, and with every creak, a fresh wave of fear washed over us. My Yi grew weaker. She barely ate, her eyes were unfocused, and she muttered constantly in her sleep, fragmented phrases about a stone, a promise, and a cold, cold heart. It was as if the entity below was draining the life not just from the house, but from her as well. My uncle was a changed man. His bravado was gone, replaced by a grim, haunted look. He spent his hours reinforcing the other stilts, his hammer blows echoing a frantic rhythm against the deep, slow pulse from the river. It felt futile, like trying to patch a dam with a handful of mud. On the third night, the pulse stopped. The sudden silence was more jarring than the sound itself. We all looked at each other, our eyes wide. Was it over? Had it given up? A fragile hope began to bloom in my chest. But when I looked at my grandmother, her eyes were wide with terror. "It is not gone," she rasped, clutching my arm with surprising strength. "It is gathering. It will not break the house. It will take someone from it." Her words chilled me to the core. A few hours later, as the moonless sky reached its darkest point, my Uncle Sathya stood up. His face was set in a mask of grim determination I had never seen before. "I cannot let it take her," he said, his voice low and steady. He was looking at my sleeping grandmother. "Or you, Aun. I am a fisherman. I have taken from this river my entire life. It is my turn to give something back." "Bong Sathya, no," I pleaded, grabbing his arm. "What are you going to do?" He gently removed my hand. "A fisherman must face the water. He cannot hide on the land forever. Stay here, protect Yi." Before I could stop him, he had grabbed his sharpest filleting knife and descended the stairs. I ran to the veranda and watched in horror as he untied his small sampan. He didn't take a net or a lantern, just the knife. He pushed off into the thick, crimson water which barely rippled around the boat. He didn't look back. The boat moved with an unnatural speed towards the center of the tributary, as if being drawn by an unseen current. Then the black water and the suffocating darkness swallowed him whole. I stood there for what felt like hours, my body trembling, my eyes straining against the blackness. The silence was absolute. The pulse did not return. The river was as still as a sheet of glass. It was a calm that felt more terrifying than any vibration. It was the calm of a predator after it has fed. I felt a profound, soul-crushing despair. He was gone. My brave, stubborn uncle was gone, sacrificed to an ancient hunger we couldn't even begin to understand. I stumbled back inside, my legs weak. My grandmother was awake, weeping silently in her bed. "He didn't have to," she cried softly. The debt, it was not his to pay in blood. What do you mean, Yi? I knelt beside her, my own tears blurring my vision. What could he have done? What can I do? Her breathing was shallow, her body frail. She reached a trembling hand and pointed towards a loose floorboard in the corner of the room, a board that had been nailed down for as long as I could remember. Our ancestor, she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. The thief, he was clever. He knew the other villagers would kill him if they discovered what he'd done. He did not sell the stone, he hid it. He hid it where the Neek could not feel it, so close but shielded by wood and prayers and the life of a family, under the floor. A sudden, shocking realization hit me. The spirit wasn't just attacking our house as the home of the Promise Breaker's descendants. It was trying to get to the very thing it had lost. It was right here. It had been here all along. It does not want a life, Rithi, she rasped, her eyes pleading with me. It wants its heart back, the heart of the river. Return it, before the water decides to take another. Fueled by a desperate, adrenaline-laced hope, I scrambled to the corner and began prying at the old floorboard with the blade of a hoe. The wood was old and splintered, but it finally gave way with a groan of protest. I reached into the dark, musty space below. My fingers brushed against rotting jute cloth, and inside it, something small, dense, and unnaturally cold. I pulled it out into the dim lamplight. It was a stone, no bigger than my fist, but it felt immensely heavy, as if it contained a piece of the earth's core. It was polished smooth, black as a starless night, and carved with intricate, overlapping scales like those of a serpent. As I held it, I could feel a faint, slow pulse emanating from it, a rhythm that was the mirror image of the one from the river. This was it, the heart of the river. I held the fate of my family, of my entire village, in the palm of my hand. Bang Sathya was still out there. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't too late. I looked from the cold, dark stone to the silent, dark river outside. I had to go out there. I had to face the water. I had to return its heart. Clutching the stone, I ran down the stairs. The air outside was cold and smelled of wet metal and decay. The red water lapped at the stilts, a slow, patient sound. It was waiting for me. I untied the small emergency skiff we kept for fetching supplies, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the knots. The stone in my pocket felt like it was pulling me down, an anchor of dread and responsibility. Pushing off from the shore was the hardest thing I've ever done. The water was thick, like pushing through oil. The boat moved silently with no wake. The silence was absolute. No insects, no frogs, no night birds, just the sound of my own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of my heart. The center of the tributary was unnaturally dark. The red hue of the water seemed to absorb the faint starlight, creating a pool of pure blackness. I stopped paddling, letting the boat drift. "I'm here," I shouted, my voice sounding small and pathetic in the vast emptiness. "I have what you want." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the thrumming began again, not from a distance, but from directly beneath me. The water around my boat began to stir, not with ripples, but with slow, thick eddies. The foul, coppery smell intensified, gagging me. I pulled the stone from my pocket. It was freezing cold now, and it seemed to be vibrating in time with the deep pulse that resonated through the hull of the boat. I held it out over the water. "Take it," I yelled, my voice cracking with fear. "This is what you want. The promise is fulfilled. Just give him back. Give me back my uncle." The water directly in front of my boat began to bulge upwards. It wasn't a wave, but a slow, horrifying swelling. A shape began to form in the depths, a shadow vaster than anything I could comprehend. I didn't see scales or eyes or teeth. To see it would have been to go mad. What I saw was a colossal living darkness, a void in the water that blotted out everything. The guttural pulse was no longer a sound or a vibration. It was an all-consuming force that shook me to my very soul. Whispers slithered through my mind, ancient words in a language I couldn't understand, filled with an eternity of cold, patient hunger. My sanity frayed, my arm shook, and I almost dropped the stone. I thought of my grandmother, frail and dying. I thought of Bang Sathya, lost in this terrible darkness. With a final, desperate scream, I threw the stone. It hit the black water with a sound that was not a splash, but a deep, resonant chime, like a temple bell struck underwater. For an instant, the entire river lit up from within, a blinding flash of deep crimson light. The immense pressure vanished, the poolsing stopped, the whispers in my head ceased, and then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. I was alone in my boat in the dark on a silent river. The water was still black, but it felt empty, sated. I paddled back to the shore in a daze, my body numb, my mind a blank slate of terror and relief. I collapsed on the muddy bank and lay there until the first hint of dawn painted the sky in shades of gray. The next morning, the village awoke to a miracle. The river was no longer red. It was a murky, silt brown again. The foul smell was gone, and tied neatly to our family's dock was my uncle's sampan. Bang Sathya was sitting in it. We rushed to him, crying his name. He was alive. He was physically unharmed. There wasn't a scratch on him, but when he turned to look at us, my blood ran cold. His eyes, once so full of life and stubborn pride, were vacant. They were flat, murky pools reflecting nothing. He looked at me, at his home, at his own wife who was weeping with joy, and there was no recognition, no spark of life. He did not speak. He did not react. He just stared. They said the shock had taken his mind, but I knew the truth. I had returned the river's heart, and it had, in its own way, honored the bargain. It had given me back my uncle's body, but it had kept his spirit, a piece of it at least, an offering taken, a debt partially paid. It has been a year since that night. My grandmother passed away peacefully a few weeks later, her last words a whispered apology to the water. The village has mostly forgotten. The cicadas sing again, though to me, their song sounds strained, more like a warning than a lullaby. The fishermen have returned to the river, and the catches are more bountiful than ever before. They say the river is generous. They don't know the price that was paid. My uncle still lives with us. He spends his days sitting on the veranda, staring at the water. He never speaks. Sometimes, when the tide is high, I see him trace the shape of a coiled serpent on the wooden railing with his finger. And he smells, faintly but permanently, of wet river mud and something cold and ancient. I no longer believe in the clean, clear logic of the city. I know that the world is old, and that there are promises buried in the earth and memories held in the water. Some debts are not paid in gold or silver, but in soul. So if you ever find yourself by an old river, a forgotten tributary in a quiet corner of the world, and the night grows too silent, be careful. Do not make any promises you cannot keep, because the water is deep and it has a very, very long memory, and its hunger, I have learned, never truly sleeps. It just waits.